This demo will show you how to go from a sketch to building some very simple relief blocks using ScratchFoam. This is a commercial product that is really just similar to the kind of styrofoam that you might get from a butcher tray at the grocery store. It's a little bit thinner though, and it holds the marks pretty well. So anywhere that you press hard with a dull pencil or ballpoint pen, those marks become indentations on the plate. And then when you ink it up with the brayer, the ink will stick to the raised surfaces and the lowered areas won't ink up. So it's a simplified version. Instead of doing a wood cut where you have sharp tools, this is a child-safe method that's pretty direct and fun. So it's a quick way to create a relief block without a lot of tools or equipment required. What I've done is I've pre-cut a piece of the ScratchFoam the same size as my rough sketch. So I plan to have a 3-color image. Because my areas are separated, for example, there's no areas where there's blue and black printed in the same area, I think what I'll do is use a single plate and cut the contours of the head and mount the background on one of my pieces of matboard and mount the head itself on a second piece of matboard. And then I'll need to decide with the yellow area, since the yellow is printing in the same area that the black is printing, I plan to print that yellow just as a rectangle instead of 6 little pieces that have to be perfectly aligned. Because the black can cover up the yellow, I plan to just print a rectangle of yellow and then print the black plate over top of it. So that's the one area that I may need to make a separate piece of foam to work in that area. But I'm also considering putting the yellow piece of foam on the same block that will be inked blue and just use a small roller to print the yellow separately from the blue. So we'll see how that works out. I've pre-cut a few pieces of matboard. This is just standard 4-ply matboard, the same size as my finished block needs to be. If you don't plan to cut your craft foam apart, you don't necessarily have to mount it on anything. You can just ink up the block itself and print it like a stamp. But I like the fact that this creates a little bit more rigidity to the board, and it helps me register the blocks in the same spot, or register the image on the same spot on multiple blocks so that my registration is more accurate. So my plan is to trace this image onto the block. Now I can just trace it directly by pressing really hard with a ballpoint pen or a pencil, a dull pencil, and that will emboss the design into the block, but that will also create a white contour. So if you don't want a white contour, you might consider a different way of transferring the image to the block. You can also draw directly on this plate. It's a little bit plasticky, so you could use a pencil doesn't stick real well, but if you have a greasy crayon or if you have a permanent marker, you can draw right on the plate lightly so that you're not embossing the lines, and then you can choose which lines you want to press hard into the plate to create white areas. So I'm going to try a piece of red transfer paper to transfer my image. This is also the point where you need to decide which way you want your image oriented in the final print. So if I want the face facing to the right in the final image, I need to transfer it to my block upside down. I used tracing paper for my sketch so that I had the option of just flipping it over and still being able to see through the image. So I think I will transfer it backwards so that it comes out, so that the final print turns out the way the sketch is facing. So I'll align this, and then in order to be able to check my progress, I'm going to tape down just one edge so that I can lift up the paper and kind of check to make sure I've transferred all the lines before I remove the tracing paper. This is just a little bit of artist tape. You can use masking tape. All right, so I'm going to be placing this red transfer paper. This is a 2-sided red transfer paper that I found at McLean's, and I'm going to place it in between my ScratchFoam and my drawing, and then try not to let the drawing shift around very much as I transfer the lines. So I'm going to do a little bit of a test to see how much pressure is enough pressure without really embossing the plate too much. That's a pretty light touch, but I want to see if that's enough. Nope, not quite enough pressure. So I will have to press a little bit harder, it looks like, to get the image to transfer. See if that's enough. Okay, not great. I'm not sure that the red transfer paper is a good product for this kind of plasticky sheet. So I will press pretty hard. I'm going to end up just sort of embossing my key shapes onto the block so that I can locate them in case the red marks don't transfer very well. And I won't draw every single hatch mark, but I do want to know where these plane changes are going to occur. So I will kind of trace the edges of these key value shifts. Okay, so really, I don't know that the red transfer paper did much good. It transferred lightly, but really the embossed lines are enough for me to go by. So the next step is to remove the sketch and start to plan which parts will be on which block. I use gray board just so that you can see it a little bit better in the video, but it certainly doesn't matter what color board you use. I'm going to go ahead and cut this shape out. I'm going to actually use an X-Acto knife instead of scissors. I feel like I have a little bit more control with an X-Acto knife. So use a nice sharp blade. And I'm going to need to save all these little bits that I'm cutting out because they will be the blue plate. So don't lose any of these small pieces that become negative shapes. Remember, always keep your fingertips out of the way of the blade. We always have students that end up cutting themselves because they are so focused on the cutting that they forget where their fingers are. The nice thing about this design is that the figure and the negative shape all align pretty well at this corner. So I'll be using that corner as my landmark for making sure that the shape is glued down in the right spot on both of my backing boards. Now, if you have any areas in your design that you want completely white, you could actually cut the foam out in those areas rather than just drawing it in with the pencil. Okay, so this will be part of the blue plate. This little tiny dot will be part of the blue plate, and then this will be part of the blue plate. I think I'll also, rather than just cutting out the yellow areas, I think I want to cut this whole shape out so that I can trace it on both of my backing boards so that I can get that rectangle in exactly the same spot in both cases. And then later I will figure out how to cut away just the yellow bits. But all right, now I'm going to mark which plate I'm going to be using for which color to kind of help keep it straight in my mind. So this will be my black plate. I'll be inking with black ink. And then we'll use another one for the blue plate. So blue ink. So I'm going to be pretty conscious about getting this shape exactly in the corner of my block, and that will be the corner that I use when I'm registering my print to make sure that things align pretty well. I'm also going to be as careful as I can to make sure this little bit where it touches the edge is also in the right spot. But before I glue this one down onto this block, I'm going to trace it onto this one so that I can get these free-floating pieces in exactly the right spot. I don't want to have the shape off at all. It needs to absolutely match that one. So I think the easiest way to do that would be to just trace the shape where I need it to be on the block. And a graphite pencil should show up fairly well on this gray board. I'm going to also trace this rectangular shape. And this inner shape is going to be kind of important too. So I'm not letting that template shift at all. You want to make sure that you're keeping them aligned. Okay, so it's subtle. I can see a little bit of sheen on the black. So I should be able to glue that down in the right spot. And then this one, Again, we want to make sure that we're as close as possible. What I'm worried about is that if this head's shifted a little bit, then the shapes may not end up in the right spot. So I'm just using the first block as a reference to make sure I'm getting the second one as close to the same spot as possible. Oops, shifted. Get it aligned again. Okay. So I'll be gluing this down with a glue stick. I think using Elmer's glue would also work fine. If you have rubber cement, that should work as well. There we go. Okay. So you could glue the backing or you could glue the pieces. I think in this case, I want to make sure I've got a lot of glue right at the edges of the board. And you don't have to be super careful here, but you do want to make sure it's got enough glue to really hold those pieces down. So be as precise as you can with aligning it with your guidelines there. This little piece. Okay, that seems to be really gripping that pretty well. If you use a wet glue like Elmer's glue, you may want to put a little bit of weight, maybe put a board or something on top of that until the glue is completely dried so that the boards don't curl. But I think the glue stick is going to work quite well. Okay, this is the piece I'm a little concerned about because it's shifting around and I don't want it to misalign with that shape. So I'm trying to look at this shape and try to match that negative shape as closely as I can. And then we'll glue this one down as well. So a little more glue in the center of the figure this time. Again, I'm not being super careful to stay within those lines. The main thing is that you've got a good coating of glue on there. The edges are going to be important, but they stick down well. Oops. And I'm looking for my pencil guidelines there as well. Make sure it's as close as possible to where it needs to be. Okay, now this part I need to figure out, look at my sketch again, decide which parts need to be removed. So I'm just going to cut out, get rid of that part, get rid of this part. I'm cutting away the parts that will be yellow. And that one, and that one. So I think what I might do is place it in there and then try to pluck them out of there so they stay more or less in alignment. We'll see how this works. So with the X-Acto knife again, just kind of carefully cutting away the parts that need to be removed. I think what I'll do is just cut all of my key lines and then I should be able to lift out alternating pieces. This circle is going to be a little bit tricky. I noticed I didn't really center that very well, but it shifted a tiny bit as I cut. For curves, it's easier to turn the plate than it is to shift your hand. Okay, so let's see if my plan works. I'm going to try to pluck out without, I don't know if I cut through this middle line or not yet. Try not to let the other pieces shift around at all. And these bits can just get thrown away. So this will be our black plate. And I need a piece of yellow here. So I'm going to, I probably should have traced that piece onto here to make sure I have the right size piece. I'm going to make this rectangle a tiny bit larger because it wouldn't hurt to have a little more of the black printing over top of it. I just want to make sure there's no white gaps in, so I want to make sure that's a little bit bigger. Might go even a little bit wider than my traced areas. And this will be our yellow area. I'm going to try printing it on the same block as my blue just to save a little bit of work for myself. Theory. Anyway, it may end up being more of a headache. But so I do want to make sure I'm within those contours of the original yellow shape. And we want it nice and level with the blue areas. Okay, so this will be yellow. These areas will be blue. And this will be our black. So this one, because these areas in the design are just flat colors, I don't plan to have a lot of designs in there. I don't need to do any additional drawing in here. But if I wanted some white line work in the background, it would be really easy to just emboss in some line work or words or whatever. If you incorporate words, you do want to make sure you reverse the words. They'll read right when it's printed on the paper. So let's continue with this one. I want to add quite a bit of hatching to bring in some lights and darks. The nose area, I mean, that might be one area that I just completely cut away so that I don't need to, and while the glue's wet, I might be able to just pull that piece out. We'll try that. I want to leave a little bit of a black contour there, I think. Oh, maybe not. Okay, that's going to let me pull that out as a white shape. And then maybe I'll do a little white highlight on the corner of the forehead. And maybe a little bit on this cheekbone. You can cut the shape a little bit smaller than so that you have room to transition that tone into another texture. This is the top lip. I want to have a little bit of light hitting there. Just loosen the contour a little bit. And the bottom lip is in light as well. A bit of the chin. And then I've got some highlights here on the neck vertebrae pieces that will be easy to just cut out as bright whites. Again, you need to do this while the glue is still wet if you plan to lift them up after you've glued the board down. So don't wait overnight or you might not be able to pull these pieces out. But this is quite a bit faster for those white areas than doing a ton of hatching. All right, now I'm using a ballpoint pen so you can kind of see where I'm pressing. And remember that everywhere you press is going to be a white mark. It's not going to be a black mark. So I'm going to add a little bit of highlight, and you have to press fairly firmly. You don't want to rip the foam, but you do want to really press it down in there. So I'm going to add a few little highlights here. I'm going to try to feather out some of these highlights on the forehead. Kind of changing direction from the way my sketch had it, but I'm going to leave the side plane black and the lips black. I'll do a little bit of hatching here so that I get a mid-tone, not leave it completely black. And then we'll do some feathering in as well on the jaw. This will be a little bit of reflected light. on the jaw to separate it from what's going on in the neck. And I'll make the marks a little more spread out and farther apart to transition to a dark area. Okay, here on the neck, I'd like to have some. Okay, we'll re-outline some of these contours for a white contour spots. The closer together you draw those marks, the lighter the value will appear. I'm leaving this area a little bit darker to create a little bit of a shadow core. And we'll do a little more light. I think I want to proof it before I do any more drawing. I might end up adding a few more lines later, but I think for now I'd like to see how this prints first. Now when we get to the point where we're printing this area, I'll be using a brayer to print in the blue areas. I can be pretty careful to stay away from this yellow square, but when it comes time to printing the yellow square, I'll need a smaller brayer. And if I don't have a small brayer, I'll need to make a stencil of some kind.